A Welsh single malt being marketed as a British single malt? What's that about? Welcome to the Tainted Tavern.
Welcome to the Tainted Tavern. Come sit inside with me.
Okay, I've got a whiskey review for you today, and that is Bankhall Artisanal Whiskey and Spirits, British single malt whiskey, which comes in at 40% ABV. Now, Bankhall was an historic distillery in Liverpool, which closed down in the interwar years. And when the company that owns Bankhall, Halewood International Holdings, decided to bring the name of Bankhall back, they set up their new all bells and whistles distillery in Blackpool, which is where they are to this current day. The head distiller there is Vince Olson, who was an American distiller, who was one of the co-founders of the Widow Jane Distillery in Brooklyn. And he was brought in to bring his expertise to provide good quality whiskey, good quality spirits for the whiskey aficionados out there. And Vince has said in various interviews that he has decided to reimagine English whiskey. Now, what has got me confused with this whiskey is it's heavily marketed. It's a single malt. I picked this up today in Morrison's because it was on a very special offer with your Morrison's card, Morrison Promote card, and I paid £18 for this 70cl bottle of Bankhall British single malt whiskey. Its usual retail price is between £25 and £30, so I thought I'd take a punt on this. But what surprised me about this is heavily marketed as a British single malt whiskey, and the box design here could have been designed by Nigel Farage. It couldn't look any more British. The back tells us that Bankhall British single malt whiskey, this amber gold whiskey finished in bourbon barrels, adds its aroma of vanilla and toffee, candied citrus fruit, fig, and sultanas. On the palate, experience dried fruit, creamy malts. I'm having trouble reading this. It's like silver print on black. Doesn't stand out very well. And dark chocolate. Bankhall Hans Slex is... Let's get some more light in here. Okay, Bankhall hand selects its liquids from the Alewood cask distilled at its own distillery, Aber Falls, Wales. So it's specific that tells us that this comes from Aber Falls Distillery, Bonington, Scotland, and Bankhall, England, to provide a unique British whiskey experience. So the company that owns Bankhall, which is Alewood International Owners, also owned Aber Falls in Wales and Bonington's in Edinburgh, as well as its own distillery in Blackpool, England. Now, opening up the bottle, rather handsome Nigel Farage type box here. It's a single malt. It's a very light amber colour. It's marked clearly British single malt whiskey, but the back tells us that this is sourced from the Aber Falls Distillery in Wales. It tells us this amber gold whiskey finished in bourbon barrels has aromas of vanilla and toffee, candied citrus fruit, figs and sultanas. On the palate, experience dry fruit, creamy malt, nuts and dark chocolate, sourced from our Aber Falls Distillery. So, to my mind, that would make this a Welsh single malt, and I can't understand why it's marketed as a British single malt. Now, Welsh whiskey is today under protective status by law. There are certain rules. Welsh whiskey must be made entirely out of Welsh malts. It must be Welsh waters. It must be fermented, mashed, fermented, and distilled in Wales for a period of no shorter than 3 years. Whiskey must be 3 years in the UK, otherwise you can't call it whiskey. So we know that this is 3 years old. Now, if this was totally made at the Aber Falls Distillery, then this would qualify as a Welsh whiskey rather than being marketed as a British whiskey. So I don't understand the company's thinking there. Now, it's possible that As I say, this was sourced from Aber Falls, so this was made in Aber Falls, so it would have had Welsh water, Welsh malt, and Welsh expertise making this whiskey. But it could have been matured elsewhere, so it could have been made in Wales and then put in casks and then shipped away and matured elsewhere, which then would mean that it couldn't be called a Welsh whiskey. It would have to be called a British whiskey. It couldn't be called an English whiskey because English whiskey is again, or rather English whiskey is applied for its legal status, and I believe that's in the works. And it couldn't be called Scotch because even if they took it up to their Edinburgh distillery and aged it there, it was still sourced from Wales, so it wouldn't qualify as Scotch whisky under the strict rules of what is Scotch whisky. It wouldn't qualify as Welsh whisky under the strict rules of what is Welsh whisky, and it wouldn't qualify as English whisky because although English whisky hasn't yet got its protected status, that is in the works, and it wouldn't qualify as that. So by labelling it British whisky, they're allowed to do that because British whisky is not a protected status. However, I started thinking maybe this is younger than 3 years then. Maybe they'd taken it from Aber Falls when it was perhaps first put in the barrel and then aged it for maybe a year or two and then sold it on as British single malt whisky. But again, that can't be so, because for it to be whiskey, it has to be aged a minimum of 3 years. So I've drunk Aber Falls whiskey previously, the old bottled Aber Falls whiskey, which is marketed as a Welsh single malt whiskey. So to my mind, this is very much a Welsh single malt whiskey, though for some reason it's marketed, as I say, as a British single malt whiskey. Not an English, not a Scotch, not a Welsh, but a British. So it is possible this was matured. It's somewhere other than Aber Falls, but it's at least 3 years old, and the contents in you are going to be Welsh water, and it's going to be Welsh grain, Welsh malt rather, and it's going to be made with Welsh whiskey making expertise. So let's crack this open now, and we'll give it a taste. First of all, neat. Then we'll take a little water to see if that does anything to it, to break it down a bit. My theory on why they're doing this is Bankhall has its own, as I say, it is a distillery, and they have invested heavily over recent years, and they now have a production capacity at Bankhall Distillery itself of 29 million litres a year. So I think they have previously released whiskies under the Bankhall single malt banner, so that would have been a whiskey made purely at Bankhall Distillery in Blackburn. But I think that they are maybe aging their stock to release their own whiskey as a more premium expression a few years down the line, and in order then to bring in cash flow, they are selling whiskey from Aber Falls or Bonington's under the term of British single malt whiskey, because it keeps the cash flow coming in. A lot of distilleries do that. When a distillery starts up, they've got a problem because their first batch of whiskey can't be sold for 3 years. So they've got all that investment of making that whiskey, storing that whiskey while it ages, and yet they can't bring in a cash flow. So what they often do then is source whiskey from other distilleries and bottle it under their own name. A lot of whiskey companies do that. Penderyn, for instance, the Welsh whiskey, I once just had a conversation with one of the co-founders of Penderyn, and I asked him if they did that, or originally purchased whiskey from elsewhere and marketed it under the own Penderyn name in order to bring in cash flow while they waited for the first batch of whiskey to mature and be ready to take to market. And I was told that they didn't do that, although most whiskey companies do. And the reasoning behind this was, what they told me was that you only get one chance to make a first expression. So what Penderyn did to bring in cash flow was they made their own gin and vodka, which doesn't have to be aged. It doesn't have the stringent age requirements of whiskey, the legal requirements to age it so long, so they could bring in a constant cash flow while they waited for the whiskey to mature. So that's just a little story there of Penderyn. And I'm also using a Glencairn glass, which is actually Penderyn branded, to taste this Bankhall whiskey now. Nice, comes in a nice presentation. The bottle's quite nice. It's a lovely looking bottle with the wording Bankhall embossed into the side of the bottle, and also on the front here it says artisanal whiskies and spirits. So it's a rather attractive looking bottle, an heavy bottle as well. This is 70 cl, comes in at 40%. That is another requirement of whiskey. For anything to be whiskey, regardless of where it's made, it's got to be aged for a minimum of 3 years and bottled at a minimum of 40% ABV. So, lovely cork as well. Now, as I say, colour-wise, it's light. Amber is the description on the bottle, but I would call it more of a pear kind of colour. It almost looks like a pear juice to the nose. Sweet, I think. Some fruit aromas there. Peach. I don't think it's had any colour in because of the lightness of the spirit, so I don't think it's had any colourings added at all. And it's probably chill filtered at this price, though I don't know. Let's take it to the palate. There's a burn on the back end of this, a slight harshness, which suggests it's a young whiskey. It's old, 3 years old, probably. I wouldn't say it's any older than that. There's a biscuity aftertaste on the finish. There was a slight burn with that going down then. When Alewood International first got into the drinks game, it was way back in 1978, and they started making wine. And eventually they branched out when they built up their drinks portfolio and moved into distilling and whiskies. Some fruit there. A little bit of a burn on the back end. It's a little harsh, but that would probably be because it's such a young whiskey. The finish, though, does linger. It's not over and done with. It does linger. While we're talking whiskey, might I plug my latest book, which is available anywhere books are sold. You can get it in any shop, get it online, get it on Amazon, request it from your local library. That is A Dark History of Whiskey by Gary Dobbs. This is a whiskey book unlike any other, and I do talk about Bankhall whiskey in this book, incidentally. Getting a crispness now on my palate. It's very much a different kind of whiskey book. It's called A Dark History of Whiskey, whiskey noir if you like, so it explores the origins of this wonderful complex drink and the darker side of that history. So that's A Dark History of Whiskey. Highly recommend it. Obviously I'm a bit biased, but I believe this is a good book, so check it out. Now let's take another, we'll add some water, but let's take another neat sip of this. On the nose now, some ethanol, a fruit, maybe a caramel. I'm not getting so much burn now, although it is, you can feel it in your chest, a little bit of a burn, but it's not unpleasant. Caramel, maybe. They say dark chocolate. I'm not quite getting that. I can add a little bit of water here and see what it does to the whiskey. Now, not a lot, just a capful, just to break it up a bit. We'll allow the water to do its little thing for a minute, because even at just 40%, whiskey is a very strong drink, and the alcohol content, the ethanol, can act like a prison, and it can act like a prison and trap, imprison, if you like, the various flavors and keep them, subdued, and then you get that alcohol burn. So by adding a little bit of water, it breaks up the whiskey, it brings flavors out. So we'll give it a second for the water to do its thing, and we'll sample it once more. But it's not a bad whiskey. I mean, and for £18, which admittedly that was a special offer. Normally you'd pay between 25 and 30 pounds for this. It's not too bad. I mean, it's not the most complex single malt I've ever tasted, far from it, but it's certainly not too bad. I just really can't understand whether using the British single malt kind of thing for this, because this is very much a Welsh whiskey. Obviously having originated from Aber Falls, but I suppose the company could also market some of the Scotch whiskey from Bonington as a British single malt. You know, and they're quite entitled to do that. I just think that this is a Welsh whiskey, you know, even if it was aged elsewhere outside of Wales, it's still the spirit, and the water used in here is Welsh water. Anyway, babbling on now. Don't suppose it really matters. Back to the nose after the water. Give it a little bit of swirl, and we didn't really talk about the legs on this, but let's take a look. The legs are, they're not really substantial, but then you wouldn't expect it on a 40% whiskey. Although the legs are there, you can see them drizzling down the glass there. Back to the nose. Right away, there's less of an ethanol burn with the addition of a little water. That fruit is there, that caramel, which I suppose could qualify as almost chocolatey. The water's definitely improved this drink. It's a bit milder on the back end. The burn isn't there. Crispy caramel taste, maybe chocolate. Fruits here, but light fruits, pears, maybe apple. It's a nice, smooth, sipping whiskey, I suppose. Far from complex. There are quite a few flavors in here. And the finish is very crisp, very dry on the finish. Yeah, it's okay. You know, I may have had a bee in my bonnet about the fact that it's not marketed as a Welsh whiskey, even though to all intents and purposes it is. As I say, they could have matured it elsewhere, which then would mean it wouldn't qualify to be called a Welsh whiskey. But in terms of the liquid you get in the bottle, the fact that it's made at Aber Falls, so its identity really, apart from the legal definition, is a Welsh whiskey. If it was aged for the 3 years required by law at Aber Falls before being shipped out and then bottled under the Bankhall name, then I don't understand why they don't just call it a Welsh single malt. So I do suspect that it was maybe a young whiskey purely made at Aber Falls and then shipped elsewhere, maybe to one of the storage facilities, maybe Scotland, maybe England, and matured there, which means it would lose its right to be classified as a Welsh single malt. It's okay. It's fruity. Caramel. Slight hint of nutmeg. Yeah, it's a nice little sipping whiskey, and I imagine as well, because of its inexpensive price, even at full price, it could be used as a mixer. I'll probably drink the rest of this over the rocks, because that's how I usually take my whiskey anyway, so there's no reflection on this whiskey. I'm not saying it's too harsh to drink neat or with just an addition of a little water, and that I prefer it on the rocks, chilled down slightly. It's just that's the way I drink my whiskey, usually on the rocks. I do prefer my whiskey on the rocks, but whenever I'm doing a whiskey review, I will initially take the whiskey straight, as I've done here tonight, and then with the addition of a little water, because I think that's the only fair way to give an opinion that is worth anything about a certain whiskey. But I mean, I'm happy with this. As I said, I had it really cheap on a Morrison's low card price of £18. But even if I had paid full price for this, between £25 and £30, I don't think I would have been really disappointed. I think it's fairly decent, and it remains to be seen what Bankhall will do in the future. And I feel that Bankhall have probably got some whiskies maturing that were made at the Blackpool Distillery, so they will be English single malts. And I've got a feeling that they've got some maturing there, and the next batch of Bankhall whiskies will be a premium product, marketed as an English single malt. But Aber Falls, which actually this is sourced from, their own Aber Falls Welsh single malt whiskey is a decent whiskey. I think it's equal to Penderyn's Celt and Legend expressions, although I don't think it's a patch on Penderyn's Madeira finish. I really like the Penderyn Madeira finish, but you know, this is it's okay. It's not a bad whiskey. Okay, so that's Bankhall's single malt, and I think I'm going to have a second glass of this before I retire for the evening. So cheers, yaki da, usual stuff, thumbs up, comment down below, please subscribe to this channel. See you soon.
Please come back soon.